In 2022, we celebrate 130 years of HBCU football. On December 27th, 1892, Livingstone and Biddle College, now known as Johnson C. Smith University, played in Salisbury, North Carolina, with Biddle winning 5-0. Over time, HBCU football has evolved. HBCU football's popularity continues to rise. Millions attend games each year and millions more watch on television. The HBCU bands provide some of the top entertainment in the country. Over that time, some of the best players to ever play in the National Football League played at HBCUs. Every Monday through Friday on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, national radio and television host Donal Ware takes a look at what's happening in HBCU football and talks with coaches, players, administrators, and media about the 2022 season. Make sure you join the conversation on social media by using the hashtag HBCU130. Now, here's your host, Donal Ware.
You've got it locked to the HBCU Football Daily Podcast for today, Tuesday, October 4th. I'm Donal Ware. It's Takeaway Tuesday on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. I've got a couple of takeaways from week 5 in HBCU football. We're really about halfway through the HBCU football season. So the box to row, the HBCU coaches and media polls came out on yesterday. And for the first time this year, Jackson State was a unanimous number one with the coaches and the media. Unanimous number one with the coaches and the media. The first time that it has happened this year, and I think maybe the first time that it's happened with respect to Jackson State. When we look at the coaches poll, Jackson State remained, of course, was number one. North Carolina Central, despite its loss to Campbell, 48-18, remained number 2. Alcorn State remained number 3. Prairie View A&M remained number 4, and Hampton was number 5. The only change in the coaches poll was Florida A&M and South Carolina State switched places from last week, which Florida A&M is now 6th, and South Carolina State is 7. In the media poll, a little bit different. Jackson State, obviously, number 1. You got Albany State and Virginia Union at number 2 and number 3, respectively. Both moved up one spot from last week. Florida A&M also moved up one spot to number 4, while North Carolina Central is number 5. And then Benedict, for the first time this year, is in the media poll at number 8, never been ranked, dominating performance against Fort Valley State. And that, of course, is one of my takeaways for today as well. We want to say congratulations to our HBCU National Players of the Week. 3. We got 3 players. As a matter of fact, Donovan Eaglin, the running back for Alabama A&M, had 190 yards rushing. He had 2 touchdowns. He also had another receiving touchdown. Alabama A&M was able to get its first victory of the season, a much-needed victory, as a matter of fact. And then also we had Fayetteville State defensive end Cameron Morrell as the other. And we talked about this yesterday, that these 2 young men were in the running. 3 sacks, 3 tackles for loss in the ball game. He also had 12 total tackles in the game. 8 of those were solo tackles. Fayetteville State defeated Shawan 13-10. So you look at those 2 young men. And then also Ike Brown of Lane, our other National Player of the Week, the running back for Lane. I mean, you talk about being key in a football game, right? So I want to make sure I have the numbers right here. I want to make sure I have everything correct before I give out. And then also Ike Brown of Lane had a 137 multi-purpose yards, 2 touchdowns, including the touchdown that brought Lane to within 1 point in overtime, and then he was able to rush for the game-winning touchdown, the 2-point convert. Well, it's not a touch, but it's a 2-point conversion, the game-winning 2-point conversion. So, and that's really one of my takeaways also. So those three young men, HBCU National Players of the Week. Let's go to takeaway number one. Tennessee State is struggling right now. There's no question about that. I thought maybe when you looked at the game against Jackson State, 16-3, you're like, okay, Tennessee State may be okay. But, I mean, that's that John Merritt Classic. And I want to look here to see how many fans were in attendance, because that John Merritt Classic is definitely, it's a huge deal there in Nashville. It's the only game, as a matter of fact, I believe is 11,533 fans. It's the only game, I believe, Division I that's sanctioned by the NCAA as that a school can put on as a classic. So it's a really big deal. And Tennessee State is struggling. I mean, I'll give Lane all the credit in the world. Lane got a good program. I talked about it yesterday. I mean, you put 42 points up on Arkansas Pine Bluff, who's struggling right now. Although Lane has lost a couple of games. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's like, you go toe-to-toe with Pine Bluff, you beat Tennessee State. And that just shows you that's why you play the games. A, B, when you talk about, it's not a lot of as much respect given to the Division II HBCUs as a whole, which I think is wrong. It's all about, to me, HBCU football as a whole. And you got a lot of teams that can play with these Division I programs. Albany State's a program that can play with Division I HBCU programs. Virginia Union's a program that can play. You go years back, Winston-Salem State could play. Tuskegee could play. I mean, it's this deal. And now you look at Lane actually putting the work in to beat Tennessee State, even though Tennessee State may be a little bit down this year. That said, if you're Tennessee State, this is the John Merritt Classic. You generally bring in a team, you don't bring in a team you can beat, but they played Bethune-Cookman in the past when Tennessee State doesn't lose in the John Merritt Classic. Okay, I think that's more of the bottom line. And for Tennessee State to lose this football game in the manner in which he did, because Lane could have kicked the extra point, went into a second overtime. Lane said, you're paying us to be here. We have nothing to lose. If we win this football game, it is huge for our program. If we lose, doesn't mean much, right? So they played as if they had nothing to lose and ultimately won that football game. So that's a big-time win by Lane. So that's one of my takeaways. Another one of my takeaways is North Carolina Central's loss to Campbell. That's as big a win, I thought, 2 weeks ago as the Eagles had over New Hampshire, over New Hampshire. And then to get into the top 25, ultimately got knocked out or didn't get voted into the top 25, even though the win was over. It was over Virginia University of Lynchburg. I mean, I get it, but still, I don't think you penalize a team for a win. Boy, it just wasn't the Eagles' day. And a lot of that is because of Campbell. Campbell rushed for 315 yards in this game. Mac Mentor's building a program. He's really built a program at Campbell. Even in the preseason, Sam Washington, the head coach at North Carolina A&T, says Campbell's got a good program. For everything I heard, I know quite a few people that went to that game. They've got a really big offensive line, was able to run for 315 on the Eagles, who have a pretty good defense. Davius Richard, the quarterback in the game for the Eagles, 21-35, 294 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also threw 2 interceptions and rushed for another touchdown, 11 carries for 37 yards. He was only sacked 1 time in the game. So he continues to put up the numbers, but wow, he's responsible for all 3 of their touchdowns. But man, that's a big loss. We'll see how the Eagles are able to bounce back from that loss, which was the first of the year for the Eagles. Takeaway number 3. Benedict Benedict's for real. I made the prediction. I thought it would beat Fort Valley State. I didn't think it would beat Fort Valley State the manner in which it did. 20 points in the third quarter. It was a 20-7 game at halftime. It was 20-6 maybe at halftime, something like that. But they put up 20 points. Did the Tigers in the third quarter, and just got it done defensively. Held Fort Valley State to just 65 yards passing. Now, with that being said, I mean, we knew, right, that it was going to be very possible that the running back for Fort Valley State was going to get loose. I mean, there was no surprise about that at all. Matter of fact, the final score in that game was 45-13. So there was no big surprise with respect to that. I think the surprise was that Fort Valley State was only able to pass for 65 yards in this ball game. And I mean, the bottom line is you're not going to stop a man. If you're Benedict, you're not going to stop Emmanuel Wilson. As a matter of fact, you probably are okay with Fort Valley State running the football a little bit. You just don't want Fort Valley State to pass. And ultimately, Fort Valley State could not pass. I mean, Emmanuel Lewis, 20 carries, 108 yards in the game, no touchdowns, right? He scored a bunch of touchdowns the last couple of weeks, 5.4 yards per carry. If you're Benedict, I mean, you shut that down. So that's kudos to Benedict, who's now 5-0 in the season. Listen, that showdown is coming, right? The showdown between Fort Valley State and Benedict and Benedict and Albany State is coming. If you're Benedict, you've got Miles next week. You don't want to look past Miles, okay? You don't want to look past Miles. You got to play that game. I mean, Miles is not the same Miles team that we've seen in years past, but it's still a team that is continuing to fight. If you're Benedict, you cannot look past Miles. That game is at home before Albany State the following week. That probably is going to determine the SIAC's Eastern Division. In that same vein, for takeaway number 4, we still have undefeated teams. Now 5 weeks plus an opening week, 6 weeks through the season, to still have Benedict undefeated, Virginia Union's undefeated, Langston is undefeated. And I'm trying to think if there's someone else. I mean, I'm trying to think about this off the top of my head. I think because North Carolina Central went down this past week was the other. Oh, and Jackson State, of course. Jackson State is still undefeated. So you still got 4 teams that remain undefeated in HBCU football. Actually, it's Benedict, Langston, Jackson State, Virginia Union are your teams that are undefeated in HBCU football. And I would say 6 weeks into the season, that's pretty good to have those number of teams undefeated. Another takeaway is I kind of look through things. I mean, first of all, that win by Delaware State, now 3-2 on the season. This past weekend was really good. I mean, you've got, South Carolina State's 1-3, but they've had an extremely tough schedule. I mean, I would say, UCF, that's tough. You're playing South Carolina this past Thursday. That's tough. It was able to beat Bethune-Cookman. But I mean, I think, losing to A&T, that's a winnable ball game. If you're South Carolina State, that's a winnable ball game. But again, South Carolina State started off kind of slow on last year. But right now in the coaches poll, South Carolina State is the only team with a losing record. And I think A&T has a losing record as well. But A&T is sort of starting to put it together, has an off week this week, gonna host Edward Waters in 2 weeks. So A&T starting to build some momentum and get some wins here. But those are your only 2 programs with a losing record right now, at least in the coaches poll. And when you look in the media poll, there are no South Carolina State at number 10, the only team with a losing record in the media poll. So listen, the season is going great. Things are getting hot and heavy. We're about at the midway point of the HBCU football season. We've still got undefeated football teams. We've got plenty of football remaining. We've got good division matchups. Look at that CIAA coming up within the division. I really hadn't had a chance to look at week 6 and see what those games look like. Of course, we'll preview some of those games and talk about some of those games as the HBCU Football Daily Podcast continues throughout this week. Don't forget to tell a couple of friends about the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, where you can find us on our website at boxtorow.com, also on iHeartMedia.com, or wherever you get your podcasts, and you can watch on the Box to Row YouTube page. Talk with you tomorrow.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. You can also listen to the podcast at boxtorow.com, iHeartMedia, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to get your HBCU football fix on Box to Row with Donal Ware each weekend on the radio station near you, and on SiriusXM on HBCU Channel 142, and on ESPNU Radio on SiriusXM Channel 84. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Box to Row for the latest in HBCU football, and don't forget to tell a friend.